Hey everyone, Harold Fisher here again, anchor and host of the Daily Drum on WHUR. I want to welcome you to yet another edition of HUR at Home on WHUR.com and all of our social media platforms. Now tonight, I'm going to be talking about a proposal to raise property taxes in Prince George. It's controversial because this question comes in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. County Executive Angela Also Brooks is already on the record as recently as last week saying that she is not supporting it. We're going to hear from both sides of this taxing question, and we begin with Derek Leon Davis, representing District 6 in Prince George's County. Councilmember Davis, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation.
Harold, thanks for having me.
So this is your bill. You introduced us. Explain in simple terms, if you can, what it's about and why you think it's necessary.
So thanks, Harold. So CB 48, 2020 is a charter amendment bill. And so as a charter amendment bill, it's a bill that the county council proffers to itself first as a legislative body to be placed on the ballot for a referendum item. Anytime we change our charter, we have to go through a referendum process. This bill specifically attempts to change the tax structure around our homestead tax credit cap. Currently, it is a cap that's in place, and in every jurisdiction in the state of Maryland, from every county and every municipality has the ability to establish their homestead tax credit rate, except for Prince George's. Ours is tied to the consumer price index currently, or 5%, whichever is lower. In the state of Maryland, they allow you to tie it to 100% or 110%. That's the state of Maryland allowable cap. No higher than 10%, no lower than 0%. And so this bill, essentially, if it passes the county council, will be fashioned as a referendum question that will go on the ballot and ask the taxpayers, the citizens and voters of Prince George's County, to remove that stricture that is currently on our homestead tax credit cap to be just like any other jurisdiction in the state of Maryland.
Why now?
Well, Harold, now, one, it's a referendum, so it has to go to the voters, and that can only happen every 2 years. Now, we are a unique county. We are the only county in the state of Maryland where something like this must happen by referendum. Every other jurisdiction has the right to do that as an act of the legislative and the executive branch, their governing body. We have to go through referendum because in 1996, there was a question on the ballot that passed that says everything that has to do with taxes has to go to the ballot. Why now? We've studied this situation and understood from the perspective of our budgeting and our budgeting process that it creates a structural imbalance that creates a structural deficit. You've probably heard us talk about having a structural deficit for many years. We also have the responsibility of balancing a budget every year as a county council and as an executive in Prince George's County. And ultimately, the reality is that creates a situation where we have, for the past 3 decades, balanced our budget on the backs of government. We've cut services. We've watched our hospital fail. We've underinvested in our schools. We watched our roads go into a state of disrepair. We've done everything that we could to try to provide the quality of life that Prince George has asked us for without the ability that other jurisdictions have to take advantage of the higher assessments in property values. See, that's what homestead it caps. It doesn't cap the tax rate. That's already been done. They did that to themselves before I was involved in politics in 1978 with trim. So we capped our rate. What homestead does is it caps how much of the assessed value you can capture and put into the tax coffers. That's what it does. So as your value in your property goes up, everywhere else in the state of Maryland, you can capture 10% of that and then add that to the tax base. And in Prince George's County, you could only capture between 5% or CPI, whichever is lower. which for the past 2 decades has averaged about 1.9%. So in Montgomery, they captured 10%. In Prince George's, we captured 1.9%. And we all know the house values in Montgomery for the past 25, 30 years are already higher than they are in Prince George's.
Councilmember Mel Franklin said recently that that this tax cap is racist because he said it was added to the county charter during the 1970s, I'm assuming 1978, as you mentioned, to prevent Black elected officials from raising property taxes because they wouldn't be responsible stewards of taxpayer money. Do you believe that that is true?
You know, the history tells us that in 1978, that I'll call it the flu of trim was flying throughout the country. California started it. I think it was called Proposition 13, landed in Prince George's County. Prince George's County in the 1980 census had started a move towards a darkening culture. The reality was African Americans were leaving the Washington metropolitan area and moving to Prince George's County. Trim came into play. It wasn't until the 1990 census, if you recall, when African Americans became the majority of the people in Prince George's County. And as we have grown, the reality is the strictures have grown even more draconian. So in 1992, term limits showed up in Prince George's County, right after the census said that Prince George's County had become a majority minority jurisdiction. Then after that, in 94, here comes Homestead. So now both your tax rate has been capped, and now the value that you can assess has been capped. And I will say the political infrastructure during that time was a very conservative Republican political infrastructure, and that machinery was essentially the machinery that went out and proposed these caps, and they actually won. They convinced the voters that this was much better for them than to have a structure that was more similar to our neighbors, like Montgomery County. Now, let me clean that up just a teeny bit, because the reality is that Prince George's County has 3 types of geographic and demographic cultures. We have an urban center, we have a suburban center, and we have a rural tier. The reality is that you see these kinds of caps and low caps, especially with regard to assessable value, in more rural areas. That's where you see those. In more growing urban and suburban communities, you don't see these caps. That's why it's very different in Montgomery County, and that's why the comparison is always made to Montgomery, sometimes to Howard. A few times we might choose Anne Arundel. But if you look consistently at it from the perspective of race and culture, from the perspective of geography and demography, the case can easily be made that people who began to flee Prince George's put these caps in place to keep Prince George's behind.
Well, that certainly can be debatable. The county executive thinks that this is ill-timed because of the pandemic, and this is a difficult time because not just Prince George's County, but the entire state, indeed the entire country is losing revenue because of the COVID-19 pandemic. What makes you think that, particularly when you're talking about a November vote, if this passes next Tuesday, 1 week from today,
right. Correct.
What makes you think that if past tax increases, property tax or otherwise, have not passed via referendum, that this year is going to be any different?
Well, quite honestly, as you said, anytime you utter the word tax, you get slapped by everyone because no one wants to hear that word. So there's never a good time to have a conversation about the word tax. It's even more harrowing when you have to have a conversation about a structural deficit, a declining state revenue, declining federal resources that have assisted us through this pandemic, and the fact that they're very likely to go away, and the responsibility of all of the nearly 1 million people of Prince George's County befall its government. The reality for us is we just experienced over $130 million of cuts in the next budget that have come via the fact that we expect certain business taxes not to be there. We expect the state of Maryland not to provide the resources. and we know that the government resources are going to go away. We are going to be stuck with the reality of taking care of our own people in a structure that has, for the last 30 years, ignored or neglected its own healthcare system, has ignored or been in a situation where its education system has been challenged by underfunding. So the reality is it's never a good time to have the conversation. But we've been having this conversation since the Blue Ribbon Commission on the structural deficit, which started in 2015. We started having this conversation as a council even before that, when as a council, I was elected in 2011, and our first budget process was fraught with the realities of recession, not from a pandemic, but from sequestration and a housing bubble that burst. So the reality of this is something that we've been facing. And if you've been on the council for more than a term, you've had to face it. And if you've had actual the responsibility of balancing that budget at least a few times, you have seen where the structural deficit is a key and critical problem. This year, we're well into our reserves just to survive. And this is before the pandemic takes full hold.
Let me, the two issues here. And first of all, Prince George's County has the highest property taxes in the state of Maryland. Okay.
Debatable. That's debatable.
Okay. Prince George's, it is expensive to live in Prince George's County because of your property taxes. That's why I live in Baltimore, and I'm from Prince George's. So let's call a spade a spade, because and I've got a good job. And let me finish. Okay, are you concerned that if this were to pass, that this could very well force some people to move out of the county? And I think the other question is, you mentioned underfunding of schools. Well, you don't have to look too far back to talk about, well, what about the casinos? And what about all the other things that we talk about in Prince George's County's remains when you come to the quality of schools? And this is no shade to Prince George's County schools. I went through public schools, but in Prince George's County, but we keep hearing this underfunded of Prince George's County public schools. I've been hearing it since I was in high school.
Well, Harold, when you and I were in high school, you got to remember, Trim happened in 1978. And again, someone said this to me the other day. You were 11 years old. I said, yeah, but you know what I remember about being 11 years old? That year I went to junior high school, that they defunded interscholastic sports. And so in junior high school, that was one of the first things to go. Several teachers, probably in the hundreds, were laid off when Trim was put in place back in the early 70s. Now that happened in the late 70s. That happened in Prince George's County. That's the reality of the beginning in the history of underfunding. 2, the reality of value is tied to your tax structure. And so our tax structure is capped both by rate and value. So both things are capped currently. So in Baltimore City, the piece of property that if you took that piece of property, same house, same size, and you said you put it in Prince George's County, it would cost a different amount of money and would be taxed differently. Baltimore City's homestead cap is at 4%. And it's in an urban area and it's at 4%. In Montgomery County, if you took that exact same piece and put it there after 30 years of an unhindered tax structure, that property would be worth probably 4 times what it's worth currently. And therefore it would yield such a higher number with regard to its tax base, not just because Montgomery County has a homestead cap at 10%, but also because they have a rate that would take into consideration what that property's value yielded to its revenue base. And so it's a very, very tricky calculation with regard to that. What I would say to you is that most people who will be impacted by any change, if a change does occur, that change is a change that goes from an average of 2% to possibly a higher average of 10%, spread out over 3 years, paid in your mortgage bill month to month. So So I've seen some estimations that do not give pause, but what I'm waiting for is that our estimators give us very consistent numbers so that we don't share and confuse people with confusing numbers about a very, very confusing issue, because it's not an easy one. It took us years as council members to even understand the impact. Then we said to citizens, we need you to take a look at this. And that's why the Blue Ribbon Commission was commissioned, to look at all of this stuff, to look at the strictures on Prince George's County's tax structure. And then after that, we even commissioned another one to look at how our tax credits across the county, essentially money we're giving back as opposed to using as revenue, how we could do that better. And consistently, in every one of those instances, these things come to bear. This homestead tax credit is killing our ability to adjust our rates, killing our ability with foregone revenue in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Well, Prince George's County Councilman Derek Leon Davis, I want to thank you so much for talking to us. Certainly, we want to remind people that there is going to be a public hearing 1 week from today, virtual public hearing, I'm assuming, at the Prince George's County Council, after which there is a vote.
So yeah, typically what happens is the public is heard and we make our decision. If we make a decision, if 8 members, because this is a charter amendment, if 8 members of the council, it has to have 2/3 majority vote to pass, then it would go to the ballot. And this is not one that can be vetoed. It's just because charter amendments cannot be vetoed. So the county executive doesn't have veto power with regard to this specific type of bill, but the voters have the final veto power with regard to this. It's their decision if it makes it to them in November.
I do have one final question before I move on to Councilmember Jolene Ivey. And the question is, how can you expect voters to say yes or to make a decision about this if you can't get them real numbers about the impact? You talked about estimates earlier and the like, and let's be flat-footed and plain spoken. As a homeowner, if you were in Baltimore City or if I were in Prince George's County, the only question that I would be asking myself
is, what's it going to cost me?
And can I afford it?
And so, Harold, again, this is a tax credit cap. And what we're talking about is something that will fluctuate based on value, on triennial assessments. So each individual homeowner has a assessment every 3 years. And so what we have to do is establish some price points. We right now, the average house in Prince George's County, a single family house, or, if you look at smaller homes, more rural homes, they have different price points. So what we want to be able to do is give people an estimate, maybe say at $250,000 value, $500,000 value, $750,000 value, if your assessment goes up by. And we want to be able to give people that type of assessment. And it's in the works, and we're going to be able to share that right on our website and right on the council page very soon. We just need to make sure that all of the financial people can agree that this is a fair way of assessing what could happen. Because this every 3 years, your home is assessed. Every year we have to balance a budget. So these are moving targets, and it's better for a politician to wait and get something that more people can agree on than to say something and then it becomes the topic that everyone bats around for no reason at all.
Well, again, I want to thank you very much.
Thank you.
Council Member Derek Leon Davis. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thanks, Harold. Thanks everybody.
And we will certainly be in touch. Joining me now for the other side of this issue is Jolene Ivey. She is a District 5 council member in Prince George's County. She opposes the tax increase. Councilmember Ivey, thank you so much for being patient and now joining us.
It was fascinating, so it was no problem at all. I enjoyed listening to your interview.
So the question I have for you is, we know that Prince George's County and the state of Maryland and every municipality across this country is going to be taking a hit as a result of the pandemic. And as Councilmember Davis said, for many, many years, Prince George's County has had to deal with deficits, this the shell game of where the money is going to come from and how do we fund these services. And we've seen cuts in services. It is a difficult and complicated process.
Well, Harold, if I could interrupt you just there, because I want you to understand something. That Blue Ribbon Commission that Council Member Davis just talked to you about, in 2015, they expected that there would be a huge deficit in Prince George's County by this last year. They thought that it was going to be $600 million, I believe, of a deficit. And that is not what has happened. A couple of years later, they revised their figures. They got it down to $175 million deficit by June 30th, 2020. And do you know what it actually was this year? We had a fund balance of $447 million. We had more money in the bank than they thought we were going to. They thought we'd have none. We had money. Now, right now, of course, we're using some of that fund balance, probably $60 million so far because of COVID. But you have to understand from the beginning that the Blue Ribbon Commission was just wrong. And
don't misunderstand. I need to ask my question, though.
Go right ahead. Sorry.
That's all right, because, you know, Blue Ribbon Commissions notwithstanding, we're in 2020 now, and we are in a completely different world. If not this, where would the county get money if voters do not? Let's say if this goes to the ballot next week, and then of course voters pick it up in November. If they don't approve of it, what's the other solution for revenue, additional revenue?
Well, you know, there are other things that we need to consider, but I think the first thing that we need to do is talk to the residents of Prince George's County. We need to be honest with them about our finances and talk to them about what is possible. What do they want? What do they want our county to look like? And what do they want to spend money on to make it that way? That's the first step. You need to include them in the process. Another part of that Blue Ribbon Commission, it started out saying, before you do anything else, you have to be transparent with voters. You have to win back their trust. We're not winning back their trust by proposing something like this really at the last minute. Like for the last several years, my colleagues who have supported this and the ones who were on the council before us could have been educating voters about this and talking to them. Is this something that you want to do? I believe that the homeowners in Prince George's County, since we're already overtaxed, since we already are paying at a higher rate than anyone else in the state, it doesn't seem that a jurisdiction that is still recovering from the housing crisis should be the ones to add on more taxes right now. It doesn't make sense. And certainly not with their buy-in. I don't think you get buy-in by bringing it up a few months before the vote that they would have to take in November. So that's just the first step, is educating people and talking to them. And there are many other ways you can raise revenue other than hitting homeowners. We've been the ones who've been paying for years.
Such as, what do you suggest?
You know, one thing that when I was in the House of Delegates and I served on Ways and Means, and I actually even served on the Revenue Subcommittee on Ways and Means. So that means that I had the most access to information about taxes and what our taxes were in Prince George's County relative to the rest of the state. Our tax burden, like the amount of effort, our tax effort that we use and that we're paying in Prince George's County is just so much higher than anybody else. We're about little less than middle of the state when it comes to income and house values, but we're at the top of the state when it comes to how much of that we're spending in taxes. So,
I remember Davis said that's debatable.
It's not debatable. These are facts.
And I'm trying to understand, you know.
He was on the same commission that told us that we'd be in a $600 million deficit. Do you want to believe that when we're not today? Or do you want to believe that the Department of Legislative Services in Annapolis crunches these numbers? This isn't my opinion. These are facts.
Well, that's my point. And he says it's debatable.
It's not debatable.
But the thing that I was going to say is that you don't have to be a former lawmaker to know that Prince George's County has the highest property taxes in the state. All you have to do is try to look to move to Prince George's County.
Right. And it's a lovely place to live, and I love living.
But with that said, if and this is the issue, if this does not work, how will Prince George's County bring in revenue for the services that all the citizens want, if not raising the cap or removing the cap?
We've had this cap and things have been fine. So, there's always more that you might want to do, but when it comes right down to it, of course, the budget is balanced every year as it has to be by law. We have a fund balance. If we have extra money in the bank, it came from somewhere. And it means that there's money that we have not been tapping into that we could have been spending. So I'm not saying that you want to spend yourself down to zero. Obviously, that's not a good way to run a government or your household. But the fear mongering shouldn't be there. We're not on the precipice of financial ruin. And if we don't raise taxes right now, then we're all going to hell. I mean, that's just not how it's happening. So I do believe we have the luxury of time, and we need to remember this foregone money that they keep referring to. It's money that stayed in residents' pockets. It's money that people have been able to use to help with their kids through college or to make repairs on their homes or whatever they want to spend their money on. So I'm not an anti-tax person. I really am not. But I don't like it when we act like money that didn't go to the government is money that's just lost. It's not lost. It was used, I hope, well by the people who've earned it. In the meanwhile, the state has not done a good job of divvying up the money that the state gets in. There are formulas that the state uses when it decides how much money goes to each jurisdiction. And Prince George's County, it's been shortchanged for years. We are well over what we should be spending, and we really are due money back from the state. So I believe that is a very important place that we need to go, is to demand our share that we are entitled to. That's number one. We're taking care of more children in the state who are having a lot of challenges. I mean, therefore, the state should give us the money that we are actually putting in as well in order to educate them. It is actually the state's responsibility to pay for the education of our children. So that's one place. And of course, the business community, we need to build that base a lot better than we have. But every time we have desires for more money, we can't go back to homeowners. I mean, the well is just dry.
You mentioned going back to the state. Do you believe that is a viable option, considering again where we are right now with the pandemic? We all know this is a tough time, and we are we're obviously still in arguably the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. Just today, word out of the CDC was saying that we could very well see an extremely difficult time this fall. And the governor, he's been saying for quite some time that money is tight coming out of Annapolis.
Yeah, money is tight coming out of the households who I serve too. I spend a good amount of my time feeding people. I mean, people are actually hungry. And so every week I'm out in the community, I'm hosting food drives, I'm helping staff food drives. It's a constant thing. I get to see how people are struggling every day. So, I know that people need money, and they probably need it just a little bit more than the government today. In a couple of years, we're going to recover, and it'll be at that time that we'll be able to make more of our demands on Annapolis. But when I was chair of the delegation there, I did lead the successful fight to change one of the funding formulas for education. And because our county was being shortchanged around $20 million a year, and it had been going on for years. So I do know it's possible to make change. You have to have the political will and you have to have the votes. And that's what they're going to need next week. They're going to need 8 votes. And it's my hope that we can get at least one of them to vote with the 3 of us who voted against this measure. And then it will not be on the ballot. My concern is if it goes on the ballot, it's not worded in a way that anybody's going to understand it. And they won't know that they're voting to increase their taxes. They will totally not get it based on how it is worded. And it was intentional. I mean, unfortunately, I hate to say that, but it's true. It was intentional. And then when it's put on the ballot, if it's put on just tucked between some bond bills, do you want a new library? Oh, of course I do. Yes. And then you keep voting yes. And the next thing you know, you get an increase in your property taxes and you're surprised. You have no idea that you voted for something that caused that. So to me, this is not the time to do it. It is not what needs to be done to bring in more money. And I think the first step really needs to be talking to people honestly and openly about the finances of the county and what we need to do in order to get more of what everybody wants.
Here's another question. If this does not pass next week, or if it does and moves to the November ballot and does not pass there, what kind of conversations do you believe that the Jolene Ivies, the Angela Also-Brookses would need to have with county residents about possibly diminished services?
Well, I'm hoping that it doesn't come to that. It is hard to say, but I don't think that by forcing more people out of their homes, because so many people are right on the edge right now, if you increase any of their bills, it could perhaps put them out of their homes. So that doesn't seem like a wise move either. To me, it is an either or, either this provision or the county doesn't have enough money. There have to be other ways. And right now, we don't even know what we're going to end up getting from the federal government ultimately when it comes to COVID. It's still up in the air. I'm hoping that we have a new president soon and things calm down and rational heads prevail when it comes to how we're handling this COVID crisis, and people can get back to work because people will be healthy again.
I think that's a good place to end this conversation. I want to thank you, Councilmember Jolene.
Thank you, Harold. You're the best.
Yeah, for sharing with us, and certainly I also want to thank Councilmember Derek Davis. That public hearing is going to be next week, a virtual public hearing, because of that's where we are right now. And
that's where we are. You can sign up to speak whichever way you believe, if you agree with me or if you agree with him. Either way, we would really love to hear from you.
Well, again, I want to thank both of you all for sharing your views, your opinions, your perspectives. It's so important that we hear from all sides. We will continue to keep an eye on this. And again, I thank you both so much. Continue to do the work that you both are doing and be safe. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That is it for this edition of HUR Home. I'm Harold Fisher. And as always,